All right. So good morning, everyone. Paul and Amelia co-facilitating this call today. Thanks to everyone for joining us for the Jakarta Community Hangout, or what do you call it, updates. The expectations. Paul, do you want to say the expectations for the 1 hour call?
Sure. We've been having these calls every month. It's a chance for us to get together in the working group and those interested in Jakarta EE to find out what's happening, to talk about any issues that are out there, and it just generally make sure that information is being shared. We do it in a variety of formats, both through the new newsletter that we just put out, by the mailing lists and so on. But I think just having a chance to actually speak, have some of the folks who are leading some of the activities talk is useful, but more important to get questions. So the agenda, hopefully you can see my screen, that we put together is fairly packed in terms of topics. We know that there's a couple of key things that are going on as we work towards Jakarta EE8, and so we'll let each of the speakers get to those topics, and then we'll open the floor up for questions at the end of each of those topics. The first one is going to be Mike Milinkovich, who's going to talk about just general updates, and then essentially about the blog that he put out last Friday. And Mike is actually on a short leash in terms of time, so we'll let him go, and then you can ask whatever questions you have for him, and then he's going to have to slip away. So with that, Mike, are you online and ready to roll?
Well, we're a little bit early, 3 minutes in.
Oh, yep, sorry. I was having trouble getting off of mute. Yes, I'm here and ready to go.
Do you want me to stop sharing, Mike, or can you share your slides, or do you want me to deal with it?
Let's have you share it, because I didn't actually click the link.
All right.
So I'll do the next slide, please, routine. And as Paul said, I apologize in advance. I can stay for about 30 minutes, and then I'll have to head over to do a repeat of this talk on the floor at Red Hat Summit in the Community Central. So highlights of the progress so far. So code is contributed, the TCK is open source, Glassfish 5.1 is Java EE8 certified and is released from Eclipse, and so it's gone through its first release review through the Eclipse development process. We at the Eclipse Foundation, in conjunction with the Jakarta EE working group, have created the Eclipse Foundation spec process, and from that created the Jakarta EE spec process. Can't overemphasize how much work it was to create an entirely new community-based specification process from scratch, and so that's actually a pretty major accomplishment in its own right. And stay tuned for tomorrow, because we're going to be publishing our 2019 Jakarta EE developer survey, and there's some interesting results there as well. So next slide. Okay, so there's lots of different channels and things going on to engage with the community. So we have the community mailing list, so please participate there if you're not already subscribed. The Jakarta Tech Talks, you have this call, the EE update call, Jakarta EE update call every month. There's condensed email updates that happen every month as well. Town halls, there's now a blog aggregator on Jakarta EE, which is going to help sort of give you a single place to go and find out what's going on with Jakarta EE. And then highly encourage folks that are interested in sort of some of the deep technical conversations on the future of this platform that are now happening at the Jakarta Platform Dev mailing list. And just so everybody understands, the Jakarta Platform is the specification project that is going to be responsible for the definition of the platform specification going forward. So this is where these platform level conversations will be happening, not just now, but in the future for many years to come. Next slide. Okay, so I'm just going to, I know that David Blevins is also talking about this after me, so I'm not going to steal his thunder. And this is the basis of a blog post that I put out this morning as well on behalf of the Jakarta EE Steering Committee. So in a nutshell, Jakarta EE8 is going to be fully compatible with Java EE8, so it still will use the JavaX namespace. and we'll be using the TCKs that have been open sourced at Eclipse without any changes. So for all intents and purposes, it's the same as the Java EE platform, but it will enable multiple compatible implementations rather than having Glassfish as the only reference implementation. And it's going to be a completely new licensing and branding regime, which is actually quite important to the ecosystem, because it means that companies can now use the Jakarta EE sailing ship instead of the coffee cup, and save themselves, in many cases, literally millions of dollars in licensing fees. And so this is a very important pivot from the point of view of the ecosystem as well. But the most important point is that it will not break existing Java EE applications. So anything that runs on Java EE 8 will run completely unaltered on Jakarta EE 8. Next slide. So the news from my blog post last week is that the main news is that the JavaX namespace is not going to be evolved by the Jakarta spec process, and we're actually going to have to change the names of the specifications themselves. So what that means is that there is, for things, obviously things cannot stay static forever. So where change is required, it's going to have to happen in a different namespace, most likely the Jakarta namespace. And this is, but this is the exact topic that's under conversation on the mailing list that I pointed to you earlier for the Jakarta platform. So if you want to dive in and participate in that conversation, by all means, please do. Next slide. And to repeat ourselves again, because we've seen this show up a few times with some major misunderstandings. Jakarta EE 8 will not break existing Java EE 8 applications. So that is a very important commitment to make to the community. Next slide. So we've done the first two steps on this journey. So Eclipse Glassfish 5.2, it might actually be 5.1 if it works, if it completely works unaltered. Will be shipped using Jakarta EE 8 branding, and we're currently expecting that to happen in the early fall. So on or around, think of September 1st plus or minus is the date for that. And then the content, what we decide is the content for Jakarta EE 9 is going to really determine when it ships. So if there's, if the community decides what we really need is massive change, then obviously that's going to take longer. So next slide.
That's it.
All right. So pause here and throw it open for a couple of questions before we hand the baton over to David.
Okay, so Mike, first, you did the update in less than 5 minutes, 5.5. So excellent. Everyone, perfect. Now, everyone, what are your questions? And just please state your name and then the question from Mike, that he's here for the next 20 minutes. Whoa, only crickets in the call? What's going on, Jakarta?
Did you enjoy yourself during this whole process?
It actually probably shaved about 2 years off my lifespan.
So Mike, sorry?
Yeah, actually just to finish that answer a little bit more. Back in the 70s, there used to be a really popular poster you could put on your wall as a kid that said something on the lines of, the definition of stress is the inability to choke the living shit out of somebody who dearly deserves it.
That's excellent. Okay, so who was going to ask a question?
Hi, this is Tobias. I don't know if this is appropriate at this time, but since you spend a lot of the time in dealing with Oracle and their lawyers, it would be really beneficial for all of the community to learn a bit more what the problems were in that process. I know that you agreed not to talk too much about that, but there is a lot of speculation going on the people that try to figure out what happened. And is there any chance to, well, highlight it a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, there's limits on what I can say, but let me try to provide a little bit of color, and hopefully that'll help. So the first point was actually the fundamental problem was actually mentioned in the blog, which is that what Oracle agreed to was to move Java EE to the Eclipse Foundation, while maintaining Java and Java SE as an Oracle property, and certainly Java as an Oracle trademark. And so where it got really complicated is that it is completely normal and expected that when you are licensing trademarks, the owner of the trademark gets to impose quality requirements. And so this is completely normal and understandable, and it was not a surprise to us or anyone. But it was, I think, where the things got difficult was that some of the quality requirements that Oracle thought were appropriate, we thought were constraining the freedom of action of the Eclipse Foundation and its communities in ways that we could not accept. And some of this is talked about in the board meeting minutes that I pointed to in my blog as well. I know it's a little bit hard to try to get everything out of there, but I think one example that was included in there was there was a proposed requirement that we would forevermore agree that any runtime ever shipped from Eclipse would be a licensed Java SE runtime, which, if you sort of think through that, that is exactly synonymous with saying a runtime provided by Oracle or one of Oracle's licensees. And when we looked at that from a perspective of the Eclipse Foundation as a trade association under US law, and from an antitrust perspective, agreeing that we could only ever ship a runtime that was based on, that was licensed or created by Oracle was not something that we felt that we could agree to. So it was one of those situations where, despite good intentions on both sides, there was a problem that was a set of constraints that was simply unsolvable. So I think that's probably the best summary I can provide at about the right level of detail.
Okay, thank you for that. And I understand that the set of constraints set forward by Oracle was not based on any legal constraints strictly, but also on some additional or let's say quality-based decisions which they deemed necessary.
Right. Well, they weren't necessarily legal constraints in the sense that they were, automatically applied. If we had agreed to the contract that Oracle was proposing, we would have been constrained forever in certain ways. And forever is a very long time.
Too long.
Comparable to an endless loop, yes.
Thanks, Tobias, for the question. Any other questions for Mike? Was that clear?
Yes, one question. Jan is asking, Mike, do you think there will be a mind shift in the future on the Oracle side?
No.
Okay. Thanks, that's clear.
It's a good German answer. How about that?
More questions for Mike. He's here and ready for you to ask him anything. that's the legendary thing about this call.
I think it's important to mention too that this isn't something that was just figured out in the last week. I mean, Mike and others have been working with Oracle for, a year and a half to try to iron out these issues. And so there's a lot of consideration that goes in there that can't be captured in Mike's brief summary, but it is something we have been around and around and around about so many times that I can't believe that Oracle would ever change their mind about the situation.
Hi, Martin here from the London Java community. Sort of have a question around the infrastructure, etc., around continuing to pass TCKs for all of the sub-specifications under the Jakarta EE brand. Is that all happening now on Eclipse or on shared common infrastructure, or are we still relying on individual vendors?
It's so we're running. Yeah, right now we're running TCKs for Glassfish on Eclipse infrastructure. We haven't yet made any commitments that we will run all of the TCKs for all products on Eclipse infrastructure, because as you can imagine, that could get pretty expensive. But it's certainly something that we're considering. It could be a benefit of membership in the Jakarta Working Group, for example. So it's something we're considering, but other than Glassfish, at this moment, the answer is no. But I would point out that what we have accomplished over the last, 6 to 8 months on the build and infrastructure side, in terms of being able to build Glassfish and run the TCKs, has alone represented an awful lot of work for quite a few people. So it's been a big undertaking for sure.
Yeah, no, it's been very much appreciated.
More questions.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Martin, you certainly have a good feeling for the level of effort required for this because of all of your work at Adopt OpenJDK, right? So you understand the kind of effort that go into this.
Yeah, it's for those listening, it's significant. It's something that most private companies would spend, a not insignificant sum of money and time and effort on. So yeah, it's a fantastic effort.
But I guess if other vendors, for example, Amazon, have their own JDK, are they testing the TCKs on the Adopt OpenJDK infrastructure, or do they need their own?
Werner, say your name. Come on, you're better than this. Come on, repeat.
So, Werner, just because, of course, some of the tests would also be by vendors who want to prove that they're compatible. And with regards to OpenJDK, if a vendor has their own JDK, can they test that on a neutral infrastructure under the OpenJDK umbrella, or do they need their own CI servers and stuff like that?
Well, this Ask Me Anything is not about OpenJDK, so let's take a pass on that question.
That's fair. Werner, do you want to reward or do something else with the question, with such a question that is not going to be answered and focused on what we're talking about? Trademark?
Well, I guess if another implementation of the spec wants to run it, that would probably not be the duty of Eclipse Foundation either. That's basically what I wanted to point out.
That would be correct, speaking for Mike.
Mike, is that correct?
Yep, that's correct. Thank you. Sorry, it got a little noisy in the background here for a second, so I put my machine on mute.
So about the blogs that we're having, let me go in here. Many of you have written blogs, and for those of you who did not know or were shocked with the blog update by Mike, the Eclipse Foundation, where anyone here is scared, what's going on the level of, whoa, what is happening as a developer? Can we go into the impact, the emotional, and whatever you're working on? Just let's be a little bit more focused on You are working on something and what happened on that moment when you read the
We
code.
talk about the technical ramifications because otherwise people don't have enough information to respond.
Okay, Bea, do you want to start?
Sure.
Mike,
Unless there are no more questions for Mike.
Yeah, I'm good with David proceeding by all means.
Mm-hmm. And remember to everyone, Mike is here for another 9 minutes. He said 30 minutes. All right, go ahead, Bea. We cannot hear you. You're muted.
There we go. I am now not muted. Okay, so we're having a discussion right now out in the open in terms of how to do the migration from the JavaX namespace to the Jakarta namespace. And how we do this is completely up to us. And I guess the important thing to point out is once we're on the other side of any migration, what we do from there on out is more or less free from any trademark restrictions or external licensing restrictions. Obviously we'd be under our own restrictions at that moment, but those are for us to decide as a community. So the North Star sentence that I would say is what we're focusing on is we want to maximize compatibility with Java EE8 and Jakarta EE for future versions without stifling innovation. So that last point is important. So basically, we want to remain as compatible as much as possible and for as long as possible within the bounds that we shouldn't make it hard to innovate in our space. We want people to be able to enter into the Jakarta EE world. We want new implementation. And we want everything to be the creative place that we want it to be. So, just a quick highlight of what I'm going to cover is what it means to transfer from the JavaX to Jakarta namespace, what we're imagining in terms of compatibility, and then the couple of proposals we have going on. And by the way, I can't read any chat, so if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to interrupt me at any time. Okay, so what it means to go into the Jakarta namespace is that effectively anything that we want to modify has to be moved from, say, JavaX servlet to like a Jakarta namespace of our choosing, such as Jakarta servlet. Okay, so this is just one example. We have Jakarta servlet.
Hold for me a second. Hold for me a second. Please, everyone mute themselves. There is something that is becoming noisy. Everyone mute themselves except David, and unmute when you are asking questions. Thank you.
So just to add to that, Amelia, all of the co-hosts, you have the power to mute people. So
I do not.
Noise, you can mute them.
I am not. I don't have the Zoom access.
I do.
Sadly, otherwise it would have been taken care of.
Paul has it.
Yeah, I will do it, and then David, you'll have to unmute, I think.
You need to mute, David. You're muted.
All right, David, you have to unmute again, and then you're good to go.
Thank you,
There we go. Okay. So for example, Bean validation would go from JavaX validation to Jakarta validation. JaxRS would go from JavaX WSRS to Jakarta WSRS, and so on. And even CDI would have to move. That was one of the questions that I had. CDI is technically not an Oracle spec. Is it still affected? And the answer is yes. Anything in the Java EE or Jakarta EE umbrella that is now going to be developed at the Eclipse Foundation is affected. So some things which are not affected, there are several JavaX packages in JVM and outside Java EE and Jakarta EE that are not affected, and some of them are not the ones you would think. So, for example, JavaX RMI and JavaX naming, which is JNDI, they're not affected. JavaX SQL, which is all of JDBC, that's not affected. There are several XML packages like Stream, Transform, and XPath, all not affected. As well, there's JMX type things, which are none of that is affected. So that was one of the very first rounds of feedback that we noticed when the tweets were happening, is people imagining like all JavaX is gone. That is not the case. And they were also imagining that you could just do a simple one JavaX to Jakarta mapping and you're done. It won't be the case. It'll be more like 50, 60 mappings. It won't be hundreds, but it will be in that ballpark. Okay, important topic to clear out. When would repackaging be required? Okay, what would cause you to have to repackage something from JavaX into Jakarta? If we were to add a method to a class that's in the JavaX API, could be as simple as adding a parameter to a method, overloading a method, changing the method, changing the exception handling. Any of that type of change would require a move from JavaX into another package like Jakarta. And then if we were going to even do something as small as add an enum value, right? Say we have, we want to add HTTP patch to servlets. Okay, that requires a change. And then therefore, everything's got to get moved from JavaX to Jakarta. Changing the behavior of any class. So we're not changing the method signature, but we're fundamentally changing how the implementation works or how the design of the code should work. That requires a move, right? So Java Mail is inherently one of those specifications that almost is entirely, you can't separate the interface from implementation. Any change in that requires repackaging, even a bug fix. Things that do not require a repackaging would be just superficial changes to documentation types of things, right? So if we wanted to update the Java doc, that does not require that the code move from JavaX to Jakarta. We want to update the specification document to expand some things, make some things clearer. That does not require a release or a migration of namespaces. We want to update the TCK simply to fill it out to be more complete, assuming we don't need to change any of the APIs. That does not require a JavaX to Jakarta transition. So important compatibility notes. So Mike mentioned it already. Jakarta EE8 will not have any namespace changes at all and will be released basically as is, all under the JavaX namespace. So there will be no potential compatibility concerns in that release at all. Jakarta EE Next will be compatible, and that will have to use some form of tooling to provide that compatibility, because it will contain some form of JavaX to Jakarta switch, at least to some level. How much is the discussion we're having now, and that's open, and we'll get to that. Got to stress that existing applications will run. And it won't be, you got to figure that out for yourself, user. It will be the vendors providing tools that allow those old applications to run. So it will be us making sure that these things happen, and we'll be accountable for it. It will likely not be a requirement of the spec, because we want to make sure that someone new can enter the ecosystem and implement just the Jakarta namespace, or whatever mix of Jakarta and JavaX is there. We don't want to deter new implementations from entering, and that would, and having them choke down legacy requirements or backwards compatibility requirements to Java EE, that would raise the bar on them. So kind of informally, we've discussed amongst ourselves, all the existing vendors, yeah, we're going to 100% be providing backwards compatibility tools. New vendors will do that if they want to be competitive. Okay.
David, there are a few questions.
I can't read any of the questions, so
exactly. So I want a little break. There are many questions in the chat. Can we take a break and someone else question?
Let's get around to questions.
Okay.
Okay, I go forward. There was a fear that having a Jakarta EE8 with the JavaX namespace and the Jakarta EE9 with Jakarta.star namespace would confuse user. Wouldn't it be better to have a different name for the Jakarta EE8 version, something which probably doesn't have Jakarta in it or whatever, so that people later can have a clear distinction between Jakarta is the thing with Jakarta X, Jakarta.star as packages, and it would be a clean rule. Otherwise, we have the same name but completely different things.
Yeah, I think we should hold that question until we have a chance to go through the proposal, so people can understand what the goals are, and what is, you know, and what is on the table and what's not on the table. But I think that's a good question. Let's go ahead. So effectively right now, what's being issued is 2 proposals. These are not the end of all proposals. This is to get the conversation going, and so people can understand kind of what it is that are the high-level options that could be done. Other options are available. The discussion is happening right now on the Jakarta EE platform dev mailing list. Everybody is welcome to join that mailing list. We have spent, 18 months or more getting to this point, so we do not want to spend another 3 months arguing about how to handle the namespace change. We want to get this done quickly. So the conversation is set to terminate and stop and conclude on June 19th. On June 9th, hopefully we have a very clear community consensus at that point. And we are organizing ourselves to get to that level of consensus. If no consensus is reached, then ultimately it will fall in the hands of the Specification Committee to just make a choice. But we're giving it a month-long shot in the community to handle it. So there's basically 2 schools of thought on this type of move. One school of thought is Big Bang, that we do everything all at once, and the other one is incremental. So how Big Bang would work is we would move only once. It's a commitment to not trickle the changes out over the course of years, that we would identify what we want to modify, what things we would want the ability to modify at any point in the future, maybe not immediately even, but we would move them into the Jakarta namespace if we felt that it was a specification we wanted to work on in the future, right? Now or in the future. So all that stuff would get moved. We would do it once. Okay, and then the thinking on top of that is if we were going to do this, it would make sense to release that immediately as Jakarta EE9, so that the industry had an opportunity to absorb the change. Now, most people, when they hear that, they go, that's a very boring release. I want new features. We can have that conversation, but we have to understand that the industry is bigger than application server vendors and application server users. There are monitoring tools, there are cloud platforms, there's IDEs, there are projects like Prime Faces built on top of JSF, and all those things have to migrate. And a lot of times they have to migrate before you can really absorb a change. So that is one of the reasons that a push out and immediately released Jakarta EE9 with only a JavaX to Jakarta namespace change is on the table, right? Jakarta EE10 would then be the first thing with new features. Or if we want to do the Mac OS X, we can call it Jakarta EEX. But you know, whatever, that's all marketing. But that would be the first release to contain new features. There are pros and cons to this. In the pros list is all the industry gets one shot to do the change and does not have to keep dealing with this over and over again. Effectively, the investment happens once, and once the dust settles, we're done with it. The other pro is that on the other side of this, we're completely free then to do all the changes we want and without having to worry about it. We are not carrying JavaX forward any longer than we have to. There are cons to this. This is the largest upfront cost for all the industry. Effectively, we'll have to choke down the namespace change in one shot. And so it does raise the bar in some regards for people. And that does, you know, make potential migrations of apps maybe a little more complicated. There's more surface area on the change. But basically, those are the high-level pros and cons. I don't know if anybody else in the spec committee or who's been discussing on the list has any pros or cons they want to discuss about Big Bang specifically.
Crickets again?
All right.
Hello. I'd like to know if the TCK also would be affected. Would that also be migrated? Tobias, what's that?
There you go.
So the intent is that question hasn't been discussed. I mean, so if a specification moved into JavaX, obviously the test would be testing against JavaX. That's not a question. That's a certainty. The question would be, is there going to be some way, if a vendor claims it can run the JavaX equivalent, are there going to be some way to prove that via tests? Probably the answer is yes. It's not an agreed upon topic yet, but more than likely it would be some sort of backwards compatibility tests for people to run. And that could simply be running the old TCK unmodified.
One question from Jan. David, I think the amount of work you have to do to migrate to Jakarta EE9 then in the Big Bang scenario is depending on the tooling which will be developed first, I think. And
right.
Then it's not that gap you have to take. It's not a Big Bang in other aspects.
Effectively, the statement you think you're trying to make is whether you write the tooling and it handles 60 namespaces or 30, the tooling has to be the same level of quality.
Yes.
And yeah, more or less. So the incremental approach is we move as needed over time, and it's, you know, theoretically the least noisy of all changes, right? So, you know, there are good 50 or 60 packages we have, and potentially we only move things like JAX-RS, CDI, bean validation, JPA, stuff that we really do clearly know we want to modify, and borderline things like Java Mail, you know, maybe perhaps connector, definitely the old, you know, JSR 88 and 77, which were management and deployment. They kind of didn't go anywhere even at launch, and they've been, nothing has happened with them for 15 years. You know, that stuff would clearly stay. And then of course, if we did want to say, if we did a release of Jakarta EE9 and it contained, say, you know, JavaX mail still, but in Jakarta EE10, we wanted to change JavaX mail, it would become Jakarta mail in Jakarta EE10. And that would mean you would have to keep straight in your head, was that one JavaX or was that one Jakarta in Jakarta EE11? I can't remember. When did we switch that one? So that would be one of the considerations. But again, the positive of this one is we don't have to speculate on anything that we would want to move. We simply move it when it is seen that we want to move it. In the list of cons is that the industry effectively would have to absorb a change on potentially every Jakarta release. And it could become a theme. Oh gosh, every time I go to update, there's more package changes and I gotta migrate more source code to use the new features, and I don't really like that. So that's a potential downside of it. The timelines of these things are unchanged, and I want to kind of point that out. It is very, very common for people to try to do kind of horse trading, because say, you know, 8 is a constant and 9 is the next version number. They view 9 as a date, and they want to cram as much as they possibly can into the number 9 as if that's how things work. That's not how things work. So not using version numbers. If we were to want to do any release of Jakarta EE that is identical to Java EE 8, you know, notwithstanding Mark's name change, right? So technically identical in every way. That's something we could get done early fall. If we were going to attempt any form of namespace change, and that was all we did, that's something we could probably get done in late fall to winter. If we're going to do any new features at all, even discussions of pruning or deprecating or removing APIs, then we're talking next year. Okay, so this is important to talk about because the level of effort doesn't change based upon what version number you put on it. So one of the most immediate feedback that people got was, I want the next version to have new features because I've waited too long. Well, that means that you're advocating we skip doing the 2 releases we could do in the interim and only do the 1 release next year. It doesn't mean that that new feature release comes any sooner. It just means now there will be no new releases and the industry doesn't have the opportunity to absorb the change while we're developing new releases. So there isn't really anything we can do to change these timelines. If we attempt to make our next Jakarta EE release a new feature release, it's next year. If we want to do some kind of small changes in the middle, we can get them in, but there is no ability to take next year's new release and move it into this year. So I think probably that's a good time to ask questions so Mark, go ahead with your topic.
Okay, I pretty much like your proposal. Can you hear me?
And I want to be clear, these were the discussions of all the steering committee. You know, Kevin Sutter, Mark Little, Aryan Times. You know, Aryan was the guy who proposed the Jakarta EE 9 immediate release. You know, so there's just tons of people. I'm only the messenger. And so, you know, that, you know, very big thank you to all the steering specification committee.
What we could do in the meantime is to think about deprecations, because that technically doesn't hurt any binary compatibility. So we should, I perfectly agree with your arguments that we shouldn't cram in new features, but we probably, if people have spare time, they can think about what features to deprecate or not, because we would just mark them. We would not remove anything yet, but people kind of have a little bit more time upfront to plan for stuff which likely will be removed in, let's say, Jakarta EE 10 or 11.
So Mark, you're talking about cutting that, in other words?
Yeah, deprecating is one thing, actually removing is a way higher bar. So I agree with you that, you know, actually removing stuff could happen, but now we're talking about like a release next year. At least in my opinion. So I don't know if others have opinions. I don't want to be the only one talking at this. At some point, we should hear from more of the specification committee, but deprecation is more achievable, but ultimately you don't release code, you release agreement, and getting agreement may be difficult. and the sheer agreement of it may push the timeline out. So, you know, that's one of the topics of Big Bang is, do we move it all or do we move some? If we agree to move all, the decision is short. If we agree, if we're going to move some, then there are going to be at least 3 different perspectives, major differences on what the sum should be. And agreement on that might take a while.
I can give you a little bit.
Hold on a second, guys. We have 15 minutes to go, and we have many members of the Specification Committee here. I recommend we open the board for others to ask questions on what has been presented right now. And Mark, you can continue after if there are crickets.
Give
me 30 seconds.
Do we have topics after this that we need to get to?
No, we do not. There are only 2 topics. Mike's presentation and update on the blog and trademark, and then the 2 proposals.
Okay.
Okay.
Tobias here?
Questions from everyone.
Tobias, go ahead.
Yeah, so when I read Mike's blog post, I felt a lot of anger. And I think that was some kind of motivator to opt for the Big Bang. This was first my preferred option.
Yep.
And then I read Richard's proposal of a legacy profile. And I really liked the perspective of not having to carry the cargo forward from all the past we had. And now I'm trying to figure out what's really the difference between that legacy profile proposal and the incremental approach. Can you outline it? Are there, or perhaps even Richard can outline that, or David?
Yeah, so this is Richard. Thanks for the question. The legacy, okay, so call it classic or call it legacy, but at any rate, the difference is that it's always maintained as a separate thing. Whereas when you do the incremental approach, you'll be mixing JavaX along with Jakarta namespaces together. And my thinking is if you can identify the Java X stuff as the legacy profile, so to speak, or classic profile, then you can, the rest of the platform can evolve without being polluted by the Java X namespace. That's the primary difference. There isn't mixing and matching necessarily.
So you're saying at some point a vendor could choose to drop the legacy profile and still have a completely workable Jakarta.
Yeah, I mean, I just sent out another email that kind of outlines it a little bit more, but basically, even if you do a big bang with JavaX, the Jakarta namespace, that big bang becomes a profile like classic or legacy that anyone can implement, but the actual Jakarta platform is independent of that. So it'll evolve with its own profiles and that sort of thing. And the JavaX namespace, or that what we identify as the Java EE 8 platform, will be its own, it will be a separate profile that can optionally be implemented by vendors or ignored.
So
hold on a second. David, stop sharing, please. And you can clarify it, or someone else can clarify whatever was said by Richard.
Well, is there somebody else that can just screen share?
You are sharing, so no more sharing. We go into Jakartese now.
Well, right, but we'll just leave this on the screen so people can.
There is no need because we are very vocal on the forum, and this is in the minutes. Thank you.
So it sounds like that. So first of all, to be clear on I really prefer to have the screen share so we can flip back and forth between the proposals if we want. The Big Bang and incremental both could involve migrating only a subset of JavaX to Jakarta. So they both have to make a decision of what we're going to migrate. And the difference is Big Bang, we're making a commitment to the industry. This is only going to be done once. And you don't have to worry about paying this cost all the time. And it's something you can rely on as a user or developer of tools or anything that you're not going to be doing this for the next 10 years. And so both of them involve potentially a subset being moved. Obviously with the Big Bang, we got to put a lot more thought into what we move up front, and with incremental, we don't. It sounds like the concept of we'll call it, sounds like the classic profile, whatever, is basically on top of either of those, everything that's in the Jakarta namespace is the new stuff, and everything that's JavaX is classic. And so it sounds like that kind of concept could apply to either Big Bang or incremental. Does that match your understanding, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I thought of it both in terms of Big Bang. The important part is that that classic profile is frozen. It's frozen, set aside. Vendors can choose to implement it if they want to, but you don't have to implement it to be considered Jakarta compliant. The Jakarta platform itself will evolve with many other kinds of profiles that you can combine. And that classic's just one of them.
Yeah. But what is the difference to just having an old application server running? I mean, nowadays, the days of the big irons where you have one server and dozens of applications or hundreds of applications running on them, they're over. Usually you have one or two applications running on the same server. If you have another application, start up a new server. So, and those old applications could run on an old profile. So I don't see a reason why we should have a runtime supplying or supporting both versions, the old and the new one.
You don't have to. You can support one or the other, but remember that to be a Java EE application server, there's trademark and marketing requirements associated with that.
Yeah, we wouldn't be in any, nothing that we're producing would allow someone to ship a Java EE application server. That's a trademark that we don't have. They could ship a Jakarta EE8 compliant app server, which is effectively the same.
Without the trademark problems.
The reason why we're discussing this is because we want to provide compatibility. And that means that you have an existing big application that probably is not so easy to migrate in one big go. So you will pick parts of it and migrate it to the new world, to the Jakarta world. And over time, you will be able to then leave the classic profile behind. So this is how it will be used and how it can be done in a company.
Yeah, to be clear, if you don't intend, say you are a Jakarta EE user and you have an app that already runs and Jakarta EE11 comes out. Let's say Jakarta EE9 because that's the safe one to talk about. You want to not update your application and run it on the Jakarta EE9 server. For the existing vendors, we've all committed to making sure that application will run without modification. So the only time that you would have to do any work on your side is if you wanted to start using a new feature in Jakarta EE9, say there are new servlet enhancements or new JAX-RS enhancements, in which case then you would have to migrate your source code from JavaX rs.ws to Jakarta ws.rs. I kind of got the packages a little bit backwards there, but more than likely, there will be plugins in Eclipse, IntelliJ, and so on and so forth that help you do that source code migration so you can take advantage of the new features and start coding against them. Because we won't be able to modify the JavaX namespace at all, so Richard's key point about the classic profile that it's frozen and never changes, that's always going to be the case because we can't legally change JavaX. So it's not a proposal, it's a constant. That part of the proposal. Anyway, so the only time you would have to do any work on your side as a user is when you want to use any enhancements that are made to existing APIs, because they'll always be under the JavaX namespace. And so realistically, say Jakarta EE 11 is going to contain some mix of formerly JavaX APIs moved in Jakarta and completely brand new Jakarta APIs. Like this was, imagine a couple years out in the future, right? So they'll be both. There'll be a mix of both. There may still be some JavaX packages hanging around that are used, but we don't ever intend to modify them, in which case they're frozen. They're not pruned. They're not deprecated necessarily. They're perfect. They're fine. We don't expect to need to change them at all.
Question.
Sure.
Actually, too, I do need the specification committee to tell us, aside from the Git, how do we continue the conversation? I don't expect another call to happen.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, please put it back up, David. That would be great.
Yeah.
So just to wrap this up, thank you everyone for the questions. And David, thank you very, very much for going through this. It's useful just to kind of walk through what the choices are. So it's been useful for me and hopefully others on the call. Also, thanks to Mike. I know he's had to leave, but I appreciate him doing this as well. The conversation continues right on the mailing list. That's the place to jump in and join. As David said, it will go until, we're targeting June 9th, but if consensus comes out of this earlier, we'll certainly work towards that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, the other topic that we wanted to get to and we just weren't going to have time today is, the planning and the work that has to go in to get Jakarta EE8 out the door. So most of what David has talked about is assuming that Jakarta EE8 is done, and then where do we go from there?
Right.
And so we're going to be calling on all of you who are on this call to engage in helping us get that done. And so, watch for that discussion to come out, I think, over the next few days and weeks, because, as was talked about either by Mike or David, ideally we'll get this out by early fall, but that only happens if we roll up our sleeves. So.
And Paul, just a clarification. The minutes do have the Jakarta EE8 repo. It's ready, so there is no reason to wait. Everyone can start contributing. We have the repo for 8, 9, and what comes next.
Great. Thank you, Amelia. So
thanks, Paul.
Yep. So I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for participating. As Amelia noted, this is recorded, and we'll get this posted. But I think it's been a useful discussion, and we'll see you next month.
Oh, we have 1 minute and one question that someone wanted to ask, and I do want to give that person.
We're going to get to it, but we can try.
Try it. Be quick before we go. And thanks, everyone, for joining today.
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. Hi, this is Scott Marlowe. So JavaX is considered frozen on the Jakarta side. Is it frozen from Oracle? At least is that the intention? That Oracle will also not be making JavaX changes in the coming years, or is that really not known at this point?
Only to the Jakarta EE JavaX packages.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, there are a lot of unaffected packages. Obviously, those will be updated because they need to. They're part of Java SE.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Smallish addendum. There are some JavaX packages which are referencing JavaX from Jakarta or Java EE space, like JavaX SQL, and we have to tweak those a little bit, or at least keep them compatible.
So they'll be maintained by the SE team, and they'll get updates, and we will absorb them that.
Exactly.
All right, so we are ending on time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. It was a pleasure to see everyone today, and the questions were great. Let's continue the conversation in the forum, and let's rock it. Happy May month. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
All right, thank you.